comes to the quality of a video game, you can easily expect quality from a company like Nintendo with a mainline Mario or Zelda game, Arc System with their over-the-top action fighting games, or a company like EA or Activision Blizzard, doing something controversial. But when it comes to licensed video games, most of them aren't really good. Not saying there aren't any good licensed games. For example, SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom, The Mummy Demastered, or Toy Story 2 and 3. Unfortunately, there are far more terrible licensed games than there are good ones. But most licensed games are either really bad or the worst video games of all time. Superman 64, Aquaman, Battle for Atlantis, Charlie's Angel, and even E.T. for Atari. The game that was one of the major starting points of the gaming crash of 1980. I've even looked at a few on my channel as well, from Casper Scare School, Tom and Jerry, Rugrats in Paris, The Simpsons, and Animaniacs: The Great Edgar Hunt. Though that one's more mediocre than bad. But there's something missing from this list of bad licensed games. Not much anime in them. Not to say there aren't any bad anime games. I mean, look at Jump Force, for goodness sakes. That's mostly because most anime games are either so bad they don't leave the country of origin, some game companies just don't want to distribute them outside of Japan. I mean, seriously, why did we not get One Piece on the 3DS? Or a lot of them are just pretty good. But when an anime game is bad, it's really bad. With some examples being Dragon Ball Z Saga, Yu Yu Hakusho Dark Tournament, and the anime license game I'm going to be looking at, which in my opinion is a game so bad, it's on par with some of the all-time worst licensed games, even Superman 64. And that game is Zatch Mamodo Fury. Released on both the PlayStation 2 and GameCube on December 2nd, 2004, developed by Mechanical Arms, and being published by BNE Entertainment, aka Bandai Namco Entertainment. This was a little before Bandai Namco eventually did the merger and became Bandai Namco Games, so this is one of their earliest official titles before the name change. While for Mechanical Arms, this was their first and only game made outside Japan until the 2010s, making games like X-Cave and their recent title being one of the worst Switch games, Super Rolla and the Lost Burgers. And it appears they haven't made a game since. You're probably remembering or don't even know what Zatch Bell even is. Time for a fun little history lesson. Zatch Bell was a popular manga series written by Makoto Raikou. The series was so popular it actually lasted 33 volumes, telling the story of Kyo Takamine, a middle school genius who one day his father sends him a young boy named Zatch, a little yellow-haired boy, and a red spellbook. Turns out Zatch is a being known as a Mamodo, a demon from another world. He, along with 99 other Mamodo children, were sent to our world to find partners in order to take on the battle for Mamodo King, featuring a lot of cool and also very weird characters along the way. It's basically a battle royale before it became mainstream. The game itself is a recap of the anime series. Unfortunately, it's a poorly done one, with the only real animation in the game being just moving PNGs left and right. Seriously, what kind of person would make a show about a still image moving a little bit from time to time? Wait a minute. Unfortunately, the anime doesn't tell the entire story of Zatch Bell, mostly because the anime wasn't finished by the time this game came out, and it only really talked about two different arcs of the series. The first, of course, being how Zatch and Kyo are introduced to the Battle of Mamodo King and learning how to work as a cooperative team, and the second being the Mamodo from the Thousand Years, where they have to battle a main antagonist named Zophis. Obviously, considering that Zatch Bell itself is a battle royale, it would make sense that Zatch Bell Mamodo Fury be a fighting game. The only difference being, Zatch Bell Mamodo Fury is a third-person fighting game, similar to later titles that would come out, like Anarchy Reigns or Bleeding Edge. Remember that game? The only problem with that being, Zatch Bell Mamodo Fury is terrible. And I'll show you why by playing the campaign mode. It's not the only mode in the game, but it is the one that'll really go into the details of what's really wrong with this game. The story mode itself is basically a big tournament and you can only play as Zatch and Kyo. And most fights against Mamodos are broken down into two parts, starting with your first fight being the first Mamodo battle in the anime series, Raycom. With the game having poorly done rendered cutscenes trying to reenact the moments of the show, and considering this is the first match of the game, you think the game would easily explain how you actually play the game. But no. But there is no tutorial in this game whatsoever. The closest tutorial you'll actually find in the game is the loading screens where it tells you what certain buttons do. Oh, and the loading screens, they're terrible. I am playing this on the GameCube version, which the loading screens are still pretty bad, but the PlayStation 2 versions are much, much worse. So by facing Raycom in the first match, and trying to learn the game's controls on your own, after beating him, you actually learn the second spell, Rush Shield, which is a defensive spell. And now you get to fight Raycom again, and this time you actually have something to defend yourself with. And after defeating the Modo, you're given a score with a rank depending on how well you did, by not losing HP, getting knocked down, or God forbid you drop your spell book. Depending on how well you do, you can get up to 3 Sun tokens. And these are used to boost Zatch's stats, as the fighting game has built-in RPG elements. And you can use up to 6 Sun tokens on any different stat of your choosing. Which then moves you on to the next fight, which is against a Mamodo named Sugino, another one-off character that Zatch and Kyo face. Though this time, the first mission actually starts differently, as the first mission is a survival mission. You have to basically survive 2 whole minutes running away from your enemy while your health is intact. And then in the second match you get to fight them, earning you more Sun tokens. These can either be very easy or very hard depending on how easy you can avoid them. Also the fact that the AI can be really stupid. Battle number 3 is against the Mamodo Kululu, an important plot point character who leads to the motivation of Zatch wanting to become king. And it's also an introduction to another mission structure, which can either be very easy or very annoying, where you have to chase around the human partner and hit them enough times until they drop their spell book, and then you win that match. And then the second match, you fight Kululu again. I'm not really going to explain the story of the game, because if you've watched the anime, you've already seen it. Also the fact I don't want to spoil the anime, because honestly the series is actually surprisingly good. Like a classic hidden gem like the anime Mare. Anywho, on to the next fight, which is against a creepy clown guy named Fane. After fighting him in the first match, you actually unlock the third spell, Jikerdo, a spell that actually magnetizes Mamodo, or their users, and this spell can either be the best or worst spell in the game, as the developers thought it would be a smart idea only to let Zatch use this spell on certain stages, as the spell is utterly useless halfway through the game, where most terrain are ancient temples or valleys and fields, with no metal whatsoever. And this is where the game takes a massive nosedive in gameplay, starting with one of the worst characters in this game, Eshros. If anyone's actually played this game, you know why this one sucks. Because the first half of the mission is one of the worst in the game, as it's another timed mission, but instead of protecting yourself from enemy attacks like against Sugino, you have to protect a specific part of the arena, the school. What makes it even worse is that Eshros' spells are earth-based spells, and they do very high damage, and you can fail the mission very quickly and easily. The only way to beat this mission is to use the Jikerdo spell and use it every 5 to 7 seconds only on Eshros, because if you hit the human part or Jean, Eshros can still use his spells, and he will try to attack Zatch. And you're probably thinking, oh, that's just one fight. I mean, they can't get any worse from here. This is level 5. Some of the other fights are far worse than this. Best example, when you fight Robnos. I mean, yeah, Eshros was bad, but at least you can still just fight him normally in the second half of the fight. Robnos is just as bad, if not worse, with the first half of his fight being solve Robnos' riddle, which, by the way, he never says a riddle whatsoever. And what you have to do in this fight is just to attack him normally, but his HP will not go down to 0. That's because you have to use the Jikerdo spell after getting his HP almost all the way down. And the only way you would have been able to solve this puzzle is by either trying every spell out of pure frustration, or you've actually seen the Zatch spell anime where this is an actual moment in the series. Unfortunately, the anime isn't available anywhere at the moment, whether it's subbed or dubbed, unless you're looking for the anime itself online, or if it gets reboot. And honestly, I would really like that. The second half is also a major pain, mostly because you can't do any high damage to Robnos unless you hit him with the terrain. The only problem being, the terrain itself is actually against you as well, as you can hit items near you, only to take damage yourself because the game wasn't programmed properly. I think you could have fixed this situation by when you actually use a spell in a specific angle, the debris actually flies in that angle of the spell. Plus, in this level only, Robnos is only affected by the terrain getting high damage. None of your spells will do jack. Luckily, Maros is probably the easiest Mamodo you fight. Though he has powerful spells, a lot of them are very easy to avoid. Yeah, the first half is another survival mission with an escort, but unlike Eshros's, which was a massive school and a big-ass target, you just had to protect a tiny little Mamodo named Tia until the time limit goes out. And just like with Eshros, you just have to use the Jikerdo spell by the cars and you'll beat it easy peasy. And then you'll obtain the 5th spell, Zakerga, a stronger version of Zakare. Now, you're probably thinking I just miscounted, but no, this is officially the 5th spell Zatch learns in the anime, and he learns it before the 4th spell, which we'll talk about later. The only problem is, your foes can easily dodge the attack, and it uses up a third of your meter to use. The next fight was against a Mamodo named Baltro, who by the way isn't playable, who is, well, pretty big. And Baltro can only be defeated by hitting 3 small targets, and this seems like a good time to talk about the controls of the game itself. Though Zatch Bell Mamodo Fury is a third-person fighting game, it has probably one of the most baffling control systems I have ever seen. To activate any spell, you have to press and hold the A button, and a bar will appear to show you different numbers. Each number is a spell Zatch has learned within the series. Of course, with 1 being Zakare, 2 being Rashield, 3 being Jakero, etc, etc. The problem with this mechanic is that sometimes you can get a perfect shot, but when you're trying to do things quickly, you can either over or undershot your spell, and use a spell you don't want to use, like the mentioned Jakero, which can be useless in certain matches like against Baltro, or another spell I'll get to much later. You mostly play as Kyo telling Zatch what to do, but you can switch between Zatch and Kyo with the press of a button, the Z button to be precise. This is very important because every spell requires having a certain amount of energy in your meter. The stronger the spell, the more it consumes. While Kyo is defenseless in this mode, you can control Zatch and run around, and if you run around for a certain amount of time, Zatch will enter a comedic dash mode, reference to the anime. What's more useful about this mode is that Zatch recovers more meter than Kyo does. But you need to play as Kyo more often, as if he gets hit while crouching, he loses his book super easily, and you have to go find it wherever it went. And the most important thing, Kyo has an automatic lock-on, while Zatch doesn't. But the lock-on only works on Mamodo, and you'll understand why this is a major problem. So you have to press one of the shoulder buttons to activate the lock-on mode, and then manually press left or right to choose the target you want to shoot. And this is one of the biggest issues with the Baltro fight, as the lock-on automatically resets when you let go of the shoulder button. Also, you're completely vulnerable and can't move around the arena while you're in lock-on mode, trying to find the perfect strike only to keep getting hit by the same dang attacks over and over again. After defeating Baltro, he reveals to be a small thing, and you have to fight him in that form. And by fight, I mean switch to Zatch, tackle Baltro, and then hit him with a Zakare spell. Don't do that, and it'll get pretty annoying. And then in the next fight, we get to face Brago, the main rival of the Zatch Bell series. You can tell because he has that Shadow the Hedgehog edge to him. This is a full-on 2-part match, and Brago is a total a-hole. You have to run around your rival or hide behind very sturdy trees and try your best to actually hit Brago, because on rare occasions, Brago can block the Zakare spell. But if they also use Ravi Ray and Ion Ravi Ray, dash with both Zatch and Kyo immediately. And if they use Ravi Bomb, make sure to always shoot that spell before it gets to you. Mostly because, for those who don't know, Brago actually has the power to control gravity, and it can be a royal pain to deal with, especially the second half. Our next Mamodo fight is against Rops, and we're back to the bullshit again. As he has strong spells like Maris, except Rops is incredibly OP. For one, he is so tiny, the lock-on has a hard time trying to hit this little guy. Second, the arena is full of boulders everywhere, and the debris issue goes into effect again, as you can end up hurting yourself in the process. Luckily, the second half is a slightly better version of the fight, as you obtain the strongest spell Zatch and Kyo know, Bao-Zakerga. This also introduces another new mission. All you have to do is hit your foe with Bao-Zakerga to win, but Rops' partner will do everything in his power to stop you from using it, as from this point onwards, all the characters who are playable are now capable of using their ultimate spells in the next few matches. And it takes quite a while to actually get the Bao-Zakerga spell to activate, as you have to constantly keep spamming spells in order to activate Bao-Zakerga. And if you accidentally drop your book in any situation, you will have to start the fight all over again, because after dropping your spellbook, it resets how long it will take to actually activate Bao-Zakerga. Also, when you activate Bao-Zakerga, Kyo keeps saying come out for a spell, and you start mashing buttons for higher damage, because this is the official 4th spell Zatch and Kyo learn, so the game itself also has continuity errors, but a lot of the other one-off characters also have made-up spells in order to make them playable, so I guess it has to make sense. After using Bao-Zakerga, you're moved to the next fight against Barancha, who is very simple of a fight. I don't even know why they even added this character in this game. Even though I have a good memory of the franchise, Barancha is like the only Mamodo I don't remember. I mean, one of her spells turns her invisible, which is borderline useless, as the lock-on still locks onto her no matter what, and she isn't invincible. But then again, I needed an easier boss after the crap that was Rops. Next up is a fight against the Modo Berry. Though story-wise, you technically lose the fight, but in the game, you still have to technically win. And yet again, this is another survival mission, but instead it's a recurring character in the anime, Suzy, Kyo's classmate, who for some reason is here, yet she has no involvement in the battle for Mamodo King whatsoever. And just like against Maris, just use Jaquerdo, and then you have to fight him to win. The next fight is against the Mamodo Kiddo and his partner, the amazing Dr. Riddle, who are my favorite Mamodo team besides Zatch and Kyo, and another character who won't appear until later in the series, unfortunately. It's a simple battle against Kiddo with the first half, though Kiddo is very range heavy with his spells, but winning will actually let you unlock the last spell in your catalog, Rauzaruk. A spell that turns Zatch temporarily invincible, but it uses up almost all of his meter just to activate, and it's borderline useless if you're playing as Kyo. So make sure to activate the spell, switch to Zatch, and then get pummeling, while Kyo is in a very safe spot. Trust me, you're gonna need it. After beating Kiddo, you're also introduced to the second match of the fight, which is not really easy to understand and doesn't really follow the anime properly either, but it's very easy if you know what you're doing. Just use Rauzaruk, switch to Zatch, chase Kiddo and attack him once while in Rauzaruk mode, and then you just win the fight. Simple, really. But now we enter the Mamodo from 1,000 Years arc. The anime states itself that this is actually where the final 40 Mamodo still are in battle, and unfortunately there's no real build up to that fact. And that's kind of sad, considering this is actually a really great arc in the anime. And I'm kind of disappointed that some of the Mamodo are actually in this arc didn't really get any story structure whatsoever. But then again, I'm also thankful, considering some of the characters that are playable. Luckily, most of the fights in this story arc are just one match only. Good thing too, because I was getting sick and tired of the loading screens in this game. With our first fight being Penny, and I'm not joking when I say this, is the easiest fight in the game. All you have to do is knock out Penny's spellbook out of her partner's hands. It's even easier than the Kalulu version of this mission. So easy, Penny doesn't even have enough time to actually activate a single spell in this fight. Ironically enough, Bianco, who was a joke character in the anime, mostly because his partner would constantly lose his teeth, so he couldn't activate any spells, is incredibly annoying. Mostly because all of his spells have far reach and can do high damage, and he only knows 2 spells! And don't get me started on Victorine. He's the very melon guy you see constantly in the loading stream. Yeah, more like very annoying. His defenses are absurd, and his attacks do insane damage. In the second half, he actually has a one-hit kill move if you don't time it perfectly in dodging. It's really hard to tell how to win this fight sometimes. Personally, I think it mostly comes down to luck for all I know. And yet he still isn't the worst boss in the game. That's mostly because he actually has a second fight where all you have to do is just use Bowser Karga, and then you're good. And then next up is a character named Lila, who's actually a very important plot-based character during the 1,000-year arc. She can be a major pain if you don't know how to deal with her spells, mostly because they too have insane reach and can be very annoying. But nothing, and I mean nothing, will prepare you for probably one of the worst moments in this game. Mostly because this section is utter BS. The 4 Supreme Mamodo. Starting with Tasawion, one of the easiest of the 4, all because all you have to do is just use Bowser Karga, and then you have to face Belgium EO. Welcome to hell. Belgium EO is one of the worst bosses in video games. So bad that if I ever made an unlucky 13 of the worst bosses in video games, he would be in my top 3, no question. For as big as he is, he can easily block both Zakar and Zakarga. Has a powerful dashing spell, a certain spell he spams constantly with high reach, and a spell that covers the whole map. And there's debris everywhere, making his fight borderline impossible even if you got A ranks and tons of skills filled at the max. You can still lose because his spells keep killing you, or you're trying to drain his HP bar to 0 only to run out of time. The trick I learned? You have to hide Kyo, switch to Zatch, and constantly use Rauzaruk, and keep beating Belgium EO and his partner as many times as possible. Run until you fill up the meter and repeat to win. I hate this boss fight so much because of how utterly BS it is. And we're only halfway through the Supreme Mamodos, as the next fight is against Pa Moon, who's the only Supreme Fork who gets 2 phases. With the first being a survival mission where all you have to do is hide in a corner and use your shield, and make sure to avoid the one-hit kill move. And then you have to dodge those things again, only this time you have to face Pa Moon. And the only reason he gets 2 phases is because he actually has a major plot point in the anime that interacts with the characters. But he's still not as annoying as Belgium-EO. And then finally, you get to face the last of the Supreme Mamodo, Demult. And luckily, he only stays in one place, unless you're a little too close to him or too far away from him. And then he'll move close to you, and then hit you with a one-shot move. The only problem is that he also regenerates health, and the only way to make it stop is to target the giant crystal shown earlier. And it takes roughly 3 to 4 Zakarga spells, but you wouldn't know that either because you haven't seen the anime, or you're trying to find a weak point similar to Baltro. You notice you can lock onto the giant rock, not knowing it heals Mamodos and restores partners' energy as well. Also, certain parts of Demult do certain amounts of damage, so you have to be able to guess where to hit him. But after finally defeating all of the Mamodo from 1,000 years ago, I get to finally face Zophis.
You may not use this road. Radom!
Are you kidding me? If you play this game on normal difficulty, you get the bad ending. And if you want to face Zophis, you have to beat the game again, this time on hard mode. Oh, and also, in easy mode, you only get to play up to Brago. True story, I wanted to get this video out last year. And, not to mention, by the time I was actually working on this video, they announced a Zatch Bell continuation manga. And that's freaking amazing! So the footage you've actually been seeing is actually me playing normal difficulty. But after playing normal difficulty, I was so drained from the game, I didn't want to actually finish it. So I played it on Twitch so you guys can see my suffering, and you can also find it on my archives channel, The Unlucky Streams. But I finally got to face Zophis. And it's a 2-parter, and all you have to do for the first half is survive 3 whole minutes. And then the second half, just use Bowser Karga to win. Wow, how disappointing. Even more insulting, he isn't the final boss. The true final boss of the game is Xenos, Zatch's evil twin brother. But he's technically not evil, but I don't care, I just want this over with. We get to finally face Xenos in Switzerland, I think. With the first match being just a full-fledged one-on-one against him, while the second one I just have to use Bowser Karga to win. But I did it, I beat the game on hard mode, and on normal mode. And what do I get? Pure, unadulterated rage. Well, with a B rank or higher, you can unlock other Mamodo being playable. Unfortunately, it's all the Mamodo from the first half, as you can also unlock a character model viewer for all the other Mamodo and partners that are not playable. Even characters like Lila, Penny, and even Zophis, the main antagonists of the game, are not playable in this game. But you know who is playable? Hyde and Victorine. Victorine, understandable. But who on earth is Hyde, you're wondering? Hyde was an anime original Mamodo who only appeared in the anime series, who made so much of a little impact in the franchise, you never actually get to see his book get burned in the anime whatsoever. These two, along with Ponygon and Zeno, are also only playable through cheat codes. Yeah, still, there is 20 characters in a roster, but I feel like the developers just gave up halfway through the game. And even with the abundance of characters, there are also many different modes you can play with them. For example, there's an arcade mode where there's a gauntlet where you have to play against other Mamodo, and you can only unlock this along with another mode through multiplayer. Of course, the typical versus mode where you can play against friends or CPUs, but I doubt you would want friends to actually play this game. Also, heads up, never play as Conchime. He's like literally the worst character to play in any game. So bad in fact, he makes Dan and Hibiki look like frickin' Akuma. There's also a 4-player mode, which you can unlock by literally having 20 different versus matches, which are nothing more than a waste of time. There's also a side story mode with Zatch playing random minigames, such as find all the candy in the jungle, which for some reason I always have a hard time finding the last one. Probably one of the easiest stealth missions I've ever seen in a video game. And lastly, the play with Vulcan mode. And I'll just show you what the gameplay is like. That's it. You just play with Vulcan, a toy Kyo made for Zatch out of a crayon box and chopsticks. And this is what happens to him if you play with him too hard. And this is probably the funniest thing about this game, because once when you break Vulcan, you can no longer play the minigame unless you reset your save file, meaning it wants you to play the entire game again in order to play a lackluster minigame. What makes it even funnier is that the developers think the player is dumb enough to do that, let alone get through this godforsaken game. Zatch Bell Mamodo Fury, without a doubt, is one of, if not the worst anime game of all time, being on par with some of the legendary terrible games like Superman 64, E.T. for Atari, and whatever stupid thing Activision Blizzard does. The game was trying to be something that appeals for Zatch Bell fans, yet this feels more like an insult to those fans. Which is unfair, because Zatch Bell is a very entertaining series. If you want a far better Zatch Bell experience, then I recommend Zatch Bell Mamodo Battles, a far better Zatch Bell fighting game. Sure, it's not as good as other well-known fighting games, but compared to Mamodo Fury, it feels like you're playing Tekken 3 when it comes to quality. Normally, this is the part where I say you should not buy this game. But like the anime nowadays, the game itself is also as obscure. I'm not saying to go out of your way to buy the game, as the cheapest it goes for is $30 on the PS2, which is still the worst version of the game, and the GameCube version is well over $100. So play it on an emulator if you know how to. The world needs to know how horrendous Zatch Bell Mamodo Fury truly is, and that if you're a big fan of the Zatch Bell series, to never play this game for as long as you live. And after going through all that crap, I need a nap. So I'm going to take a review break and work on some other video types. But until then, good night, everybody.